Just this week, I had one of the most memorable experiences in the entire 8 months since my family and I moved here to live in Spain. And no, it wasn't one of the bucket list items like visiting the Alhambra here in Granada where I live, or hiking on the Camino de Santiago, which we plan to do, or visiting amazing cathedrals in Barcelona. All of those are great, by the way, but this experience was much more simple, but still special. And it's an experience that never would have happened if we hadn't been doing something called slow travel. Welcome to the Real Estate Investing Podcast with Coach Carson. I'm your host, Chad Carson. You can also call me Coach. And this is a show to help you build a profitable and passive rental property business so you can spend your time doing more of what matters. If you're new to the show, or if you haven't listened in a while, my family and I moved to Granada, Spain in July of 2022, and we're still here, and we're planning on coming back about 12 months after we got here. And this has sort of become a pattern for our family. I mentioned that the theme of this show is building a rental property business that allows you to spend your time doing what matters. And there's all sorts of things that I'm sure you want to do with your life and you dream and aspire to. Well, for us and our family, it's travel. We love traveling. And in particular, we like this style of traveling that takes it a little bit slower. Now, there's nothing wrong with vacations and getaways and just kind of detaching yourself and going to the beach. Those are great as well. I enjoy those. Slow travel is a little bit different. We started experimenting with this in 2009 before we had kids, and we went to South America for 4 months, and that's where I originally learned how to speak Spanish in Peru, and we backpacked in Patagonia and southern Chile and Argentina, and just really had an amazing experience. And we got hooked on that experience of taking our time and slowly going places. And we did another trip once we had kids by moving to Ecuador in South America. And my kids were 3 and 5 at the time, and they learned to speak Spanish. They went to local schools. We rented an apartment for a long period of time and just had a really good experience with that. And so the pattern for us is to take these longer trips where you go deep into the place that you're living instead of just kind of going there for a short period of time. I like to think about it as being a long-term guest instead of being a short-term tourist. And this allows you to do a couple different things. Probably the two big themes for me in this slow travel idea is one, that you get to experience personal growth. So for me, every trip I'm taking is about learning something, about growing, building a skill. And in this case, with this trip to Spain, it's been about my Spanish, which I'll talk to you a little bit more about. But it's also about people. So personal development and people, and going deep on relationships, not only with your family, the people you're traveling with, but also on the new people that you meet on these trips. And that brings me to the memorable experience that I started the episode talking about. So this past Sunday in the morning, I got up and I ran a 9-kilometer race with a group of my Spanish friends. So I'm not much of a road race person. I like to play soccer. I like to play basketball, but this was something that my friends invited me to. It was amazing weather, and it was supposed to be a special race where you go up, run up kind of the mountain outside of Granada, overlooking the city, around the Alhambra, through the old parts of the city, through the old winding streets. And so there's a lot of elevation gain, which was kind of difficult, but it's also just a really neat experience. And I met them that morning. We all started the race together. We all kind of went at our own paces during the race, but then we celebrated afterwards together and just had a really good group experience. And then later in that day, one of the people I ran with, he and his wife invited us over to have dinner, to have drinks, and just to have an afternoon with them at their house. So there's about 10 people there, and we're hanging out. They made a really good meal with some local soup. They also had other appetizers, just kind of local Spanish, interesting food, and just had good conversation. Had a conversation 100% in Spanish, by the way, which is important to me, and just talked about our own stories, about what's going on back at home, talked about just little different cultural, interesting things there, and the Albaicín that I had questions about, and the Albaicín is the old part of Granada where we live. And just had a wonderful, slow afternoon. Now, why was this so special to me? For a couple reasons. One, because as I mentioned, it was 100% in Spanish. And I mentioned that the personal growth challenge for me in this particular trip that I'm taking was to try to elevate my level of Spanish. Now, I've learned it in the past. I've spoken it proficiently. I can get into a taxi. I can order food. I can do that kind of thing fine. But to have more nuanced conversations where you're explaining how health insurance works or doesn't work in the United States, or explaining or asking a question about why does this little thing happen with the local government, or those kind of questions are a little bit more difficult, and you've really got to get a better level of listening and also interaction during that conversation and vocabulary and fluency. So I'm not 100% fluent. I'm definitely have a long way to go, but I was able to maintain that conversation for hours on Sunday afternoon and interact in the conversation and offer stuff to the conversation. And so that was really a special moment for me because it's almost like an exam showing that your Spanish has improved. Like, hey, this hard work that I've been doing of watching YouTube videos in Spanish, of going to class twice a week, of doing practice on conversations regularly, that little by little over a long period of time, 8 months, can actually pay off. And when you're really studying something like that, whether it's a language, whether it's learning to invest in real estate, any other skill that you're building, it takes time. You have to kind of work slowly at it, and it doesn't always come overnight. So that was the first part of that long afternoon of running and then hanging out with them. That was pretty special. The other part of that slow travel allows are these deeper connections and friendships. So the story of how I met these friends is interesting. About a month after we arrived here in Spain, I was going to language school, and one of my goals was to find a group to play pickup basketball with. That's one of my habits. Every week I like to play pickup basketball in the United States. It's just fun exercise. It gets some social camaraderie with other people. And so I was asking around the language school and everybody else I met saying, anybody playing basketball in Spain? Is there a pickup basketball group? And I hadn't yet found the basketball group, but somebody did say, hey, there's this group of people who I play with. I play indoor soccer, football sala, and you're welcome to come join us one week. And so I said, all right, I haven't played soccer since ninth grade, but why not? Let's do this. And so I joined this group, met these people. You pay part of the cost of the field for the entire year. And not only do you play at 9 p.m. every Thursday night, this group has been playing for over 20 years. These are a group of local guys who live in this community where I am in the Isle of Bicine and Granada. They know each other, they're friends, they're brother-in-laws and colleagues and just people who are neighbors. And so they've been doing this for a long time. And I kind of felt like I was in on something special. Like, wow, they invited me to come join this game. I had fun. I'm horrible at soccer. I've gotten a little bit better. But after an hour of playing, you get some exercise. You then take a shower and you go hang out, have drinks, and again, practice your Spanish. For me, it was a big deal, and just get to know people. So for a couple hours after playing soccer, every single Thursday night, I was hanging out with this group of people. So I got to know them. And the interesting thing about slow travel is that if we had come for 2 weeks to visit a place, you could get to know the place, you could get to see the sights, but those kinds of things, kind of getting your foot in the door to meet people and to really become more a part of a community, at least in a temporary way, is really difficult to do. It takes time. And this is not only when you're traveling. Think about any community you're in, wherever you live. It takes time to build relationships. Going fast and being busy and giving somebody 1 minute isn't going to go deep and establish those kind of relationships that are really rich and that really enrich your life and that are special in the long run and produce memorable experiences. And so for me, it was getting the foot in the door, going to soccer every Thursday. When you're walking around in the community, you just might bump into somebody and see one of the guys who owns a local bakery, and you say hello to him and talk to him. Another one's an architect. Another one works at a local store on one of the local squares. So you start having these little micro interactions over a long period of time. And the fruit of those, almost like you're planting a seed and you're growing a fruit tree, and it takes time to grow the fruit tree. It takes time to build these kind of experiences in these relationships. The fruit of that is one moment like I had on Sunday, hanging out with people and having just a really good, rich experience. And so that is, for me personally, a really cool moment and a cool validation of the reason for having space in your life, for the reason for having long periods of time, and all the way back to the rental property business, for the reason to have passive income or relatively passive income, the reason I've worked really hard to build systems and to be able to work in my real estate business for a couple hours per week, is have these big, huge spaces of time to do other things that matter. And so this hasn't just been for me either. That was my kind of experience in Spain. My wife, for example, came here and she is a language teacher. And so she professionally wanted to be able to use her language skills and also meet people, kind of like I'm wanting to meet people and practice. She has been volunteering teaching English. And it took 3 or 4 months for her to really find a place where she could go volunteer. She's been giving workshops on the history of the United States and interesting people in the US, but teaching it all in English and using language skills to teach that. She taught Christmas songs and holiday songs or pop culture songs, all in English. And so she's a really good teacher. She's taught Spanish in the United States, but has enjoyed teaching English here. And that's opened some doors for her to be able to meet other language teachers here in Granada, to have relationships with them. She's also been able to take art classes. She's been able to take yoga, some other mindfulness classes that she's into. And so for her, very similar to me, personal development, growth professionally, but also personally, and taking classes, and also people, meeting people, took time. And the fact that we were here for 8 months has allowed her to do that. My kids the same way. We've enrolled them in a local school, and I love it. We're a 3-minute walk from our school, so we can leave. School starts at 9 o'clock. We get up in the morning, and most of the time we're leaving 5 till 9. Sometimes we're leaving 2 or 3 minutes before 9, and we kind of stroll in there right as things are starting. But for them, the same thing. For learning Spanish, learning math, learning language skills, learning social studies in a foreign country, big personal growth and development for them, but also socially. So the social aspect of school is very challenging. They've had the more difficult experience having to assimilate, having to meet new people, having to speak Spanish all day long because they're in Spanish schools. And that has been also something that's taken some time. They already had language school skills when we arrived. They spoke when they were 3 and 5. They learned Spanish in Ecuador. But by being in the United States and speaking English a lot at home, which we're trying to do better, they lost a lot of their language. It was kind of the back of their head somewhere, but they didn't have it actively. So it took time. It didn't happen like we thought. 3 months, we thought they'd be good to go and speaking really well. They have more English friends here. It's more of a kind of international school, a lot of international people there. So at recess, they're still speaking some English, and that's taken some time. But just in the last couple months, so about 6 months into this, they've really developed their language skills. And we could tell we've been speaking at home, and over meals, we've been speaking Spanish, and we get to see it blossom. Just like the fruit tree I talked about, their language skills have blossomed, their friendships have blossomed, and it's really gone deeper. So the point of all this, not to say you need to do the exact same thing we're doing. Taking a year off, I know, is a big deal, and that's a stretch, and it's something that you can't just do overnight. But I would love to encourage you, and from my own great experience in this one day that was sort of the fruit of a lot of other things that have built up during my experience here in Spain, is to just inspire you and hopefully encourage you to set your own goals. And whatever those goals are, whether they're travel, whether they're building a garden, whether they are homeschooling your kids and traveling around the country in an RV, or whatever it is for you, it's going to take time. It's going to take space. And if you want to do those kind of things that matter to you in your life, you've got to engineer your entire business, your entire investing around that end goal. Because not every business model out there, not every podcast you hear talking about this is how somebody built a real estate investing business, the mechanics of their real estate model might not work to fulfill the goals that you want to fulfill. That's why I focus a lot here on the podcast on the small and mighty investor. I really have found personally, and I really believe that if you build a business, a real rental property business that is focused on lifestyle, then keeping it smaller or maybe growing it a little bit slower. If you want to grow it big over time, that's fine. We're still growing our business and trying to build more wealth. But the pace of life, the pace of your business has a direct correlation with how much experience you can have along the way. I call these the plateaus along the climb up the mountain. I've been journeying towards financial independence since I was 22 years old, and you grow and grow and grow, and we take a plateau and we take our 2009 trip. And then you grow some more and you hopefully increase your cash flow and your wealth, and then you take another break. Those plateaus, those slow trips, those mini retirements, whether it's 2 weeks, a month, or a year, have been the best part of our experience. If I had not done that, if I had not kind of sprinkled those throughout, I don't think my real estate investing and my growth experience would have been as fun, would have been as fulfilling. And really, I didn't get to taste the fruits of why I'm doing this in the first place. And so that's my motivation today for sharing my own personal story. I hope you can take it and kind of use it for your own goals. And I just want to remind you that that's what this show is about. This show is about the nuts and bolts of real estate investing. But all of us have a story like this. All of us have some dreams that we want to do. We have some slow trips we want to take. We have some slow hobbies we want to start pursuing. We might have a slow nonprofit we want to start. And those are going to take some time. Time is the ultimate currency of living a good life. You have to have time. You have to have flexibility. And if you're busy, or if you're always growing, or if you're always pushing, that's not necessarily going to give you that bank account of time that you need to do the things that matter to you. So that's a little bit of an update of our time here in Spain. If you enjoy this type of episode, leave me a comment if you're watching on YouTube. Send me an email to podcast@coachcarson.com. I'd love to hear from you. If you have some suggestions or if you'd like me to get some more updates on Spain, or if there's any other details that I haven't shared that you'd love to hear about, I would always like to know and love to hear from you. I also want to encourage you to join me next week for a new episode on negotiation. It's the most valuable skill I've developed as a real estate investor. It's also the most valuable skill I believe you could develop as a real estate investor. It's made me literally millions of dollars. And I'm going to talk about some stories, some negotiations that I've had as a real estate investor, and what unlocked those negotiations, how they made more money, and how they're actually not as complicated and maybe as pushy or business-like as you might think. It has to do with storytelling. It has to do with being a normal human being. And I think you'll find it refreshing and something that you can do if you want to improve your own negotiations. So I'll see you next week. If you like the show, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to my free email newsletter at coachcarson.com/REI Toolkit. In addition to weekly updates, articles, and behind-the-scenes tips from me, my email newsletter subscribers get my real estate investing toolkit, which includes a property closing checklist that I actually use when I buy properties, a real estate deal worksheet, a tenant screening criteria checklist, and other spreadsheets and goodies that will help you on your journey to financial independence using real estate. You can get it all for free at coachcarson.com/REI Toolkit. I also want to take this time to thank some people behind the scenes who make this podcast possible each and every week. This includes my podcast editor extraordinaire, Michael Wynn, my amazing virtual assistant, Megan Thompson, my wife, Carrie, who helps me behind the scenes and is my partner here at Coach Carson. And of course, thank you to all of you, the listeners of this show who make everything possible. This show exists for you. It exists because of you. And I really appreciate you being here for another episode. Everything I've shared with you in this episode has been for general education purposes. I have not considered your specific situation or risks. Before buying your own investments, be sure to consult a financial, real estate, and/or a legal professional. Until next time, I'm Chad Carson. You can also call me Coach, and this is a show all about helping you get out of the financial grind so you can do more of what matters. See you next time.